believe it started.
Okay, thank you so much. So we will get started with a quick overview of the FinTech Innovation Lab, and then we'll talk to JC and John from Ion Channel. You can think of the FinTech Innovation Lab as a program that works with early to growth stage startups that are focused on selling and having products and services for the financial services institutions. We do work with fintechs, insurtechs, enterprise techs that are solving problems for large enterprise clients. And in a bit, we'll kind of look at the portfolio of the partners that we have. From the get-go, as you apply to the lab, the senior technology executives from financial services and insurance companies really get to kind of select and define the topics that we're working on and select the startups that really they want to spend 3 months with in a very intimate capacity where you can have them on your side of the table to really share feedback, understand the right set of use cases that would be very helpful for them. And then most of the startups end up with some POCs towards the end of the lab. A couple stats that I'd like to share. So we have 40 financial services institutions, about 40 plus, 42 to be exact, that are part of the program. Each startup gets paired to about 4 to 6 financial services institutions once they are in the program. As I mentioned earlier, most of the startups end up with a few proof of concepts as they're wrapping up the program, which is 12 weeks. Which is 3 months. And we have had about 100 alumni and 340 proof of concepts. Here is a showcase of all the partners that we have, so you can see all their names, and then you spend about 2/3 of the time in the lab with these financial services institutions. There's also venture capitalist firms that are involved in the program, about 12 of them, and that's more office hours format and critical junctures where, based on where you are in your journey as a startup, you can engage with them in a non-kind of more informal capacity to get feedback on how to scale or where to go for funding or topics that you might not want to talk to financial services institutions about. So as I mentioned, each startup gets to be mentored by 4 to 6 financial services institutions or insurance companies. We look for startups that have a beta product at least, but typically you have more, and you get to kind of really get feedback on that product, how that's landing, where are the best use cases, what are the nuances around it that you'd benefit from that you wouldn't really get to hear from a sales pitch. And then you get access to their leadership and other people within their organization. So as we kick off the program, there's a scope of definition that we kind of work with the startups and the financial services institutions to collectively come up with. And then you have your wish list of what you want to accomplish in that 12 weeks. So every journey within those 12 weeks is very custom. So you can kind of come up and define that at the start of the program. And that could include meeting people from procurement or info security, and also the business where you're really trying to understand the use cases in the product market fit. And 2/3 of the program is really spent with the financial services institution. The rest of it is focused on other areas of development. We have about 7 executive sponsors that are very niche that we get to spend some time with, and you'll see their names on the following slide. We also do some meetings with very senior executives and CEOs that you can kind of have really open dialogue around. We have a day where we go to DC and get to talk to all the regulators and just get that sense of the regulatory aspect of the industry, and then the conversation around what you're doing and where that fits into the framework. We do some media messaging and PR training, really applicable stuff around procurement, pilot setting up, and some regulatory and compliance dynamics. And these are the mentors that I was mentioning that you get to kind of have access to, and they act as informal advisors to the extent that you want to engage with them. But they're really niche resources to just discuss topics around talent, around how to price your product, again, things that you probably don't want to take to your target customer. In terms of who should apply, so we're looking for B2B, B2B2C, or white label solutions that are really addressing problems and priorities for financial services and insurance companies. And it can be fintech, insurtech, enterprise tech. It could also be products and services that have demonstrated some success in adjacent industries or different geographies, and you're interested to expand in New York and North America. This is a really good gateway to do that. We request that you have a beta version of the technology at least ready or more, but that's kind of the bare minimum that you probably want to have as you apply to the lab. And the program runs late March to late June, so willingness to be in person during that time in New York. Not all of it is in person, but a good chunk of it is. And as we kind of are going back to the post-COVID world, if we can call it, we're aiming for a bit more hybrid setup, but willingness to be kind of present in New York during those 3 months is another requirement. And in terms of funding, we don't really look at where you are in your funding stage. We really care a lot more about where you're in your product development and if you will actually be the right fit for the lab. But historically, seed to Series B is kind of the success kind of stage, more seed to Series A, but we have companies who are in seed, pre-seed and Series B. We've had them historically, and they've done well. The last thing I want to cover for some key dates, and then jump into talking to John and JC, is what are the topic areas that we are looking for this year. So as we start the year, the fiscal year, we have conversations with all the 40 financial services institutions and really understand their priorities. And this is the outcome of those discussions in terms of where they are looking to partner with tech vendors and startups. This is not a comprehensive list. As you can imagine, the partners that we have represent many different kind of interests and areas. But by and large, this is a bit of a summary of that outcome. So anything that has to do with data, predictive analytics, AI, particularly kind of AI that is able to be kind of defended and explained and has good insights in terms of actionable, maybe hyper personalizations for customers and internal modernization and expedition. Digital client engagement is always a very important topic in terms of how to engage with your clients and how to make that more personalized, more seamless and customized. Future work, especially with the macro talent environment and the talent war and the changes within hybrid work environments. That's a very, very important topic, has come up so much. So we'd love to see solutions in that space. Anything to do with inclusion and diversity. Metaverse Web 3.0 is a relatively new topic that we've added this year, but it's kind of underpinning all the underlying technologies that add up to create the Web 3.0 version. But broadly, there's just a lot of interest to see what startups are doing out in the space, from smart contracts to e-commerce enablement, digital twins, marketing with the metaverse, and the intersection between digital and the real. Payments is another category that is new for this year in terms of particular infrastructure modernization, with some regulations changing in the US in the space. Also, just like global commerce, more and more important. Risk and compliance and sustainability, again, are very important, particularly for sustainability, carbon solutions, carbon markets, decarbonization, as many large institutions have published their commitments in this space. Lastly, I'll cover some key dates. So the applications are open. We will share after this an email with the application link. And the application deadline is December 1st. We would encourage everybody to apply as soon as they can and not wait till the last minute, because we can share feedback. You might run into some challenges. It's always just good to have some more time. And as we get into the next section of the discourse, we can hear tips and tricks around application. But that's coming up. It's open now and ends December 1st. The finalist demos are in early February. So we have the written application, and a subset is selected to come in February in New York and present demos. And then we have a tech exhibit style kind of matching of the financial services and startups. And the program, as I mentioned earlier, starts late March and runs for 3 months, ends with a demo day. You can look at our last year's demo day to just kind of get a sense of what that looks like. We have in-person and virtual aspect to it. The virtual engagement over the last few years has been about 10,000 interactions over the course of years. So the in-person demo day has about a couple hundred key stakeholders that engage with you from financial services, institutions, and investment community. But post that, there's also a virtual version that just kind of lives on and becomes a really good resource for the wider financial services community to engage with you. So with that, let me unshare my screen and invite JC and John for a quick introduction and tell us about Ion Channel and your experience with the lab.
I'm going to unmute. So Ion Channel is a software supply chain risk management platform. We monitor software bills and materials on vendor products and contractor deliverables for customers so that they can stay on top of supply chain risk coming in from third parties, as well as their open source components. And we were encouraged to apply to the lab by an alumni of the lab. And this is kind of a virtuous circle because we in turn are encouraging other startups to apply based on our experience. And I think that there's a lot of this kind of positive word of mouth. We've gotten amazing input from companies, and it was like a fantastic experience. The expertise is really, really good, and it's forced us to do a lot of homework and thinking that has allowed us to evolve our message, our communication, and obviously the introductions to the sponsoring organizations are also great. So we applied and we, presented, and then we were finalists, and we also presented in a group setting. So there's a little bit of a game show element of this. But it was an incredibly positive experience, learning experience. And, they're just the professionalism and the level of organization and real value add has been, really fantastic. There's a lot of accelerators out there. And this is really at the very top of those programs.
Thank you so much, JC. John, do you want to do a quick introduction and share about what you do and how was your experience with the lab and from a Ion Channel perspective?
Yeah, John Scott, President of Ion Channel. I'm sort of in charge of the business sales pipeline. So I think from that perspective, that's kind of my focus is helping to kind of find new folks who want to do pilots and things like that. And so I think just from that getting feedback about what we were doing right, what we were doing wrong, maybe what we could polish, I think was really invaluable talking to folks in terms of what really was resonating, and also really just to hear what their problems really are. 'Cause I think we all go in with, here's what we think we're going to be doing, and here's how we view the problem, and only to hear like, well, no, I've got 20% of that problem that you've got that you're talking about. And so I think it really helped us kind of re-baseline and refocus kind of our efforts in terms of what our technical roadmap and our go-to-market strategy really was. So super positive experience. I mean, I tell everybody all the time, like, yeah, I send the link out a lot of times to people, like go and join up. But it was a super great experience. I think that the one thing I would definitely say is, we weren't able to get up to New York, I think, as much because we started this during, Martez will remind me, I think it was the beginning of this spring, which was still sort of iffy in terms of people's travel and things like that. But I would definitely, but when we were able to get up there for face-to-face meetings, we had a great time and met lots of great people. So I think if you do it, definitely make the investment of being in New York for every single event and every happy hour, because those were super important to meet folks and get feedback informally that way as well.
Yeah, last year was our first year coming back to in person. So this is a 13-year-old program. The first 10 years we ran it virtually, in person, and then with COVID it was virtual for 2 years, and then came back to kind of a hybrid mode last year. And we want to do more in person this year. So I know JC, you have to hop off at in 10-15 minutes. So a couple questions for you, and then we'll direct the questions to John. So JC, what was your expectation going into the lab, and how was that met or not met?
So our expectation was that we were going to be able to interact with the kinds of enterprises that we want to do business with and make our customers. And those expectations really were met and exceeded in some ways, because one of the things that uh, the lab does really well with the sponsors is to provide some kind of Sherpa-ing and navigation. At a lot of these enterprises, they're very large organizations. It's often not clear who the right person to talk to is. And everyone participating really wants to get the lab participants to the right person, whomever that is inside their organization. And that tacit knowledge and that connectivity within an organization. I mean, you could spend 6 months trying to figure out who's who in the zoo. And these guys, they really do want to get everyone around the campfire to make best use of their time and yours.
Thank you so much. That is very helpful. In terms of just walking through tangible kind of amount of time you spent and what was like the day-to-day like, what were those, 3 months like for you?
So there's a cadence of face-to-face events. So, I think that they were a little bit bunched. Sometimes they were, one week and then the next week and then 3 weeks would go by, right? I don't know what you're doing with your scheduling this year. And then there were some virtual events. There were some one-on-ones with some of the entrepreneurs and residents. But the days are very intensive, and then there's also a lot of workshopping, if you will, right? If you come in with your pitch, you might go through, that same pitch 3 or 4 times in the course of a program with different audiences, whether that's the customer audiences, figuring out what they respond to, or the venture people, right? They have their own perspective on it and they'll give you honest feedback, and even media trading, right? So there's someone in there doing mock interviews to help you communicate, if you're being interviewed by someone in the press. And that's not necessarily something that your, typical entrepreneur is going to have had in their experience.
How was the lab feedback that you received, and then how did that kind of impact your business?
So I think we had really good feedback from the participants. Some of it was a little bit of corner coaching in terms of interacting with the sponsoring organizations. Some of it was about messaging and even like the pacing of messaging and presentation. And in our interaction with the sponsoring organizations, we're in a space, software supply chain assurance, that is an emerging category. And a lot of our customers they're on their beginning of their journey too, trying to figure out, how do I iron out this kind of third party cyber risk in my products? And we're kind of right along there with them. So I think we learned really as much in these conversations with our customers as as we did from the staff. In other categories where you have a company that might be a disruptive of how it's being done today by some incumbent technology, I think that might be different. For us in an emerging category, it was really a great chance to have very high quality conversations with the customers who themselves are trying to figure it out. And that leads into some more consultative type of selling that we do about, what's the business process to enable, better levels of supplier risk management that, of course, our platform can help you provide.
Yeah, and I think you hit a very important point, right? Everyone's journey is going to be a bit different, and that's why the type of conversations that are going to have and is going to be a bit different. But as we start the time frame, we have this kickoff meetings with the executive sponsor and the Sherpa, and then you come with your wish list, and they come with their wish list. They have chosen you, so they have a set of like understanding of who you would be interacting with, what kind of people they want you to kind of present in front, and what sort of dialogue they would want you to have. So they have a view on that, and then collectively you kind of come up with the scope for the engagement. And it is not altruistic. They're all bought into this because they want to come in and also learn from you and understand, what you're doing. But it's a very good two-way dialogue where you're able to listen and kind of understand, as Scott was saying. Sometimes your use cases, etc., might radically change. So with that, JC, how was kind of the hybrid experience? I know John alluded to this, and it was a little bit of an adjustment last year, but what you found useful in person versus remotely?
In some ways, the hybrid, the remote stuff was great when you had, the Sherpas kind of collecting people within their organizations to do a Zoom, because it is very difficult nowadays to schedule multiple people within an enterprise into the same physical room, and that's just the world we live in today. I think where the in-person events were really great was, getting that group feedback, in the room. You never really have a sense of it until you do make that physical pitch. And then also the interactions with cohort, right? So our siblings in the class, and sometimes the feedback you get from your brother and sister entrepreneurs is as useful and certainly as emotionally compelling as any of the feedback that you're getting from your mentors.
So we can switch gears. We talked a little bit about the program in terms of the application process, where most of our audience is, kind of at that juncture, right? Thinking about the application process and whether to apply or not. Can you talk a little bit about, how much time you spend on the application process, its level of difficulty, any tips that you have within that context for the
So
start?
I will, and then I'm gonna drop the mic
Sounds
because
good.
I have a 2:30 actually with a financial institution um, that you guys introduced us to. So,
Okay.
that's proof in the pudding. I think the application process was pretty light. The one thing that I would advise, and you've probably answered these sort of questions before, right? So there's no shocker, gotcha questions in there. You
Yeah.
probably answered them before. The only thing I would say is that, just be as candid and authentic and your own voice as possible, because there's a lot of really polished market speak that all sounds the same. But I think we spoke really in our own voice, and I think that it really rings true when you're speaking, from your experience as an entrepreneur.
Thank you so much, JC. That's a great note to hop off on, and good luck with your next discussion. So, John, a few questions for you, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So, in terms of advice that you have for applicants at this stage, what would that be?
Yeah, I think first, if you for applicants, I think just spending some time on the form. I think really kind of probably letting some other folks read it before you maybe submit it. So it's I think the usual advice. So it's as crisp as possible. Folks can really understand what your value proposition is. I think also looking at probably honing your pitch a little bit more towards financial services and banking and insurance markets, because ultimately those are the folks who are going to be doing the cut down. And I'm not sure how much of this is actually out in the ring, but the way it works, at least the way it was explained to me, was we ended up getting our mentors based off of that and the pitches that we gave. So so if you want to get the right mentors who understand what you're doing. I mean, I think the worst thing would be to get in there and they're like, well, this is not Bitcoin related. This is something else. So I think being as clear of how that would impact those markets in terms of, making money or saving money or making things better, faster, stronger, cheaper, I think is probably the better way of spending your time in terms of making sure that that's really clear before you get to the cut down to when you get your mentors. That's probably the way. I think I think if there was a video component still, Martiza, right? Yeah. So I think that's practice that a lot, have your mom watch it. It's probably a good way of doing it.
Yeah, those are amazing components, John. So, right, the value proposition, which is a lot of where the discussion is, like, what is that? And then there's differentiation, right? That is one that we talk a lot about with, especially if you're in a bit of a crowded space, just like authentically what you think is differentiating about you. Any credentializing aspects that you can add to the application, like if you have some customer traction, if you've closed some big deal, you might not be able to share names, but however you can refer to them, adding all of that in your application does make a difference. And then to John's point, the video is one that people actually requested a few years ago, so we've added it. And if you're able to really make a custom video for the FinTech Innovation Lab, that would be really appreciated by the senior executives who spend some of their time during the holiday season to look at all of this and put their scores and use that feature a lot. So the video and getting that right would be helpful. So the application overall is quite light. It takes about like 20 minutes or so, but if you're able to devote some time, and if you get it in early and not kind of struggling the last minute, we're happy to give you any feedback if you reach out or if you have any questions too. So John, anything else in terms of just overall your experience, things you'd want to share with startups, and then after that we can open it up to questions from the startups.
I mean, I wish it didn't end. I mean, that's the only thing that probably would throw out there. I think that the staff has been super helpful. I think the other great thing was that once you're in the program, it's Martiza and the rest of the staff that's there to kind of help out. We're really on us about getting things in and getting things done and scheduling meetings, and it's great. It's great. I think that if you can make your way through the process, I think it's probably. I mean, we were part of one of these sort of 4 years ago or so. It's a lot smaller, and I think that out of the other ones I talked to, some other friends who've done these, this is the best one I've ever heard of and experienced. So I think it's highly worth your time to go do that, especially if you're trying to break into financial services and insurance markets. I think really you get out of it what you put into it. And so I think don't just see it as like, well, that's just a channel for this. It's like I think you really have to kind of be in New York, go try as much as you possibly can. I know that everybody's probably remote, but be in New York, bite the bullet and buy the train tickets or plane tickets and be there as much as you possibly can.
Thank you so much, John. I think all of those are extremely helpful components. And as you mentioned, the program has, it kind of ends, obviously, but it does not, because you become part of this family. We have 100 alumni. From an Accenture perspective, we tab into them and work with them. Also from the partnership perspective, Partnership Fund for New York City, that is the partner and co-founder of the lab, they have made investments and they stayed tied up, and they do some alumni events and have really good insights and connections within the venture and the financial services space. So they're an amazing resource to have on your side. So we think of folks who join the lab as part of the family. Not to mention, we also have a chapter in London and APAC, so you become part of like a global entrepreneur community that you can tap into and have access to. A lot of our startups have actually used the New York lab or vice versa, use other labs to kind of expand within those local markets. So with that, we will open it up to questions. I do see some questions in the chat. And so I'll alternate. If there are anybody who has questions, please raise their hand or just unmute yourself and please go ahead and ask questions for John, for myself. Kevin, please go ahead.
Hello, Amani. Thank you so much for putting this on. Kevin with Swipe Credit. We support financial institutions, compliance regulation in the space of small business lending. So my first question is regarding the program. Can you kind of walk us through the phases of the program, month one, month two, month three? And then my second question is, can you highlight the characteristics of the previous cohort companies that you would consider to be best in class? What were some of the things that they were doing while they were in the program to get the most out of the program? Thank you.
So maybe I can walk through the first one, and then John, you can think about the second one in terms of characteristics that you saw for yourself and others, right? And you have witnessed the different stages. So let me kind of paint that picture a bit. So in terms of where we are now, right, we have conversations with financial services institutions. We work with two people the CIO and their direct report generally from these organizations. Sometimes it's head of innovation, and obviously all these organizations are a little different, but typically it's a CTO, CIO individual who will join a couple sessions, right? Especially as we start the program, the intro session they'll be on. And then there's someone who's reporting into them that is a senior person and becomes like the chaperone that you the matchmaker. So we have that conversation with them in terms of what their priorities are. That's what you saw published. Applications open, applications end December 1st. Then we take those written reviews and orchestrate a very complex process within financial services institutions, the CIO and the chaperone. And then we also work with the executive in residence sponsors and venture capitalist community to just get your kind of scoring in, right? So from the moment you apply, you start getting exposure to the financial services institutions. And they do the scoring, they do the selection. Accenture and the partnership fund will orchestrate this process. In February, early February, we have a couple days where we invite a subset of ones that they want to hear a little more from. So you can think of the application process, and I'll go through the different stages as an onion, you're peeling. So you want to have enough interest developed by these. There's only so much you can cover in the application, right? And there's only so much you can do in the pitch and then the demo. So you want to just make sure that your application is like, yeah, I want to see more. Like there's enough like factors in here. And then obviously some of it is beyond your control. There was only, some spots, right? So if that topic might be very important, but right now their budget for is like this particular area, or where they can create more traction within their organization is in this particular area. And that's why sometimes people will reapply too. So if you've applied before, we encourage you to reapply. Also, if you're not in the list of the topics, we encourage you to apply because they don't know what they don't know, right? So there's always interest in kind of seeing that. So in February, there are a couple of different kind of sessions where there's some pitches, some demos, and then out of that, the financial services institutions really raise their hand and say, I'd like to spend, 12 weeks with Kevin and spend, that time. And then the 3 months, the start of the month has like some orientations as we kick off the program. You come, you kind of get a full download of what to expect for the 3 months. Then you get to meet all your financial services sponsors. You do a quick pitch in front of them. And that's kind of the first few days of the program. You also get to meet all the rest of the cohort. And start kind of connecting those dots. You get to meet the executive in residence sponsors or like a bit niche mentors who could be good point of contacts, and you can book office hours with them throughout. And then the first few weeks are really focused on getting to meet your mentors, right? So every startup has about 4 to 6 mentors. So you have these hour-long calls where you get to really define the scope of engagement. What is your wish list? Who do you want to meet? What type of conversations do you want? What areas within their enterprise you would kind of want to tap in? And they have a view and they have some stakeholders lined up for you to meet, because obviously that usually takes a long time. And when they have met you in February, they know who you are, you're kind of selected, right? Just spend some time with them. So they're bought into spending those 12 weeks and kind of opening their space to you. And it's not it's a bit of a construct, but it's not really sales focused, right? Because that's a bit of an opportunity lost. If you're going to go in there and just do a sales pitch, it's more so like, hey, this is what we do. This is how we're thinking about it. What are your thoughts? And you want to spend more time listening than necessarily like talking, right? And getting their input, understanding the product market fit, use case. And these relationships are really important because then ultimately they result into proof of concepts and sales, and enterprise sales are really relationship based, right? So you get that opportunity to have an advocate inside who can kind of really understand what you're doing and share candid feedback, and then almost become a bit of an advocate over time. So that's how the program, and so out of those introductory meetings, you come up with like some more brainstorm sessions and then feedback on pitch. And like, it's really what you want to do, right? And where you are in your stage and who you're going to talk to. And then those meetings kind of start getting scheduled. Entrepreneurs spend about 60% of their time based on experience so far with the startups that we've had from their leadership, C-suite leadership within the program, because on the flip side, very senior people are showing up. So they expect And it's a bit of an opportunity lost if your leadership is not able to kind of show up, but there's smart ways of navigating and managing that based on how slim your team is and where you are in your journey as a startup. So hopefully that kind of paints a picture, and then it ends with demo day. In the middle, we have a day where we'll go to see the regulators. We have bunched like the in-person stuff, and we're still kind of sorting that out a bit. So they're more like towards the start of the program, in the middle, and towards the end. And there is a bit of a hybrid setup. So hopefully that helps kind of paint a picture of what the program looks like. John, in terms of startups that you have seen kind of having the profile that are successful, and what would it do to make the most out of it?
Yes, I think in our cohort, and I posted just a link there, and I'll find there's also a YouTube channel that has the demo day at the end there that you kind of do, so you can get a feel for what that is. I think they were an interesting mix of sort of really early stage startups to maybe people who had gotten through Series A or Series B. I think some of the other ones have gotten some funding recently. I think from a verticals they're looking at, it was everyone from doing like B2B and B2C. I think a lot of some folks were doing B2C for loan payments or for gathering up loans. We're clearly in the technology side of things for folks. So I think it was a good sort of maybe third of kind of companies that were sort of more utility like. I think there's a couple of crypto companies that were in there as well. I think it was a little bit of a good grab bag for I think all the folks who are involved with fintech from a corporate perspective.
Dahal, please go ahead.
Hi, Dahl Winters here, CEO of Terranexum. Thank you for the invite. My question has to do with regard to what you're looking for on the application with regard to FinTech. Our company has come out of mainly the technology, data analytics, and sustainability space. And so while we've served on some projects having to do with InsurTech and similar areas, we don't have the largest knowledge of the FinTech market. We do know that we can actually accelerate workflows that involve image analytics by huge amounts with regard to what customers are currently spending to upgrade their systems to meet that demand. So for our application, do you think that we should focus on a few key areas or examples where we have been able to explore how much the speed ups are that we can deliver, or should we try to look at some FinTech or InsurTech examples? And once again, thank you so much. We're definitely going to need some help scaling next year because we're all overworked. So this is really a good opportunity for us.
Yeah, and I want to make sure I kind of do justice to your question and like really get you what you need. So once you look at the application, if you have any questions, like please feel free to reach out, send me an email or Shivani an email, and Shivani is going to send an email to, Shivani is my colleague on the call. She's going to send an email to all of us with the application date, deadline, a link. So please take a look at the application. If you have any particular questions, feel free to, we're just an email away. And our role and our job and our focus is to kind of help you put the best foot forward. So as JC was mentioning, there's nothing in there that's gonna be like looking to trick you, right? It's just the more yourself you can be, the more kind of information you can provide, the better it's going to be for everybody to make like good decisions. The application is gonna kind of cover a broad set of things, so I would definitely kind of articulate from a perspective of the people who are going to see this. And it is going to be generally CIO level, like organization, someone from their organization looking at it, or head of innovations. There's some mentor folks. So the audience is a bit broad. So the best advice I've usually given to people is like, if a 15-year-old can understand this, like that's really good. So if you can simplify it, eliminate all the jargon, really get to the really core of like what you do, how this is going to really solve problems for large financial services institutions. There are some questions on like who would be your target customer within their organization. There are various questions to kind of make sure you're kind of they're able to understand what you do. There's also a video, and there was a question about the video in the chat in terms of what that video is. So there are instructions in the applications, but it's basically like a 2-minute spiel of who you are, what you're solving. So it's maybe some of it is redundant in the application, but it's another way for them to just kind of like watch this and be like, aha, okay, this is what you do. This is where you'd fit in the organization. This is how you do it. Okay, I get it. And then look at some other questions, but within the video description, there is some kind of guidelines in terms of what to include and what not to. So hopefully that was helpful, but feel free to reach out with any particular questions. And this is an open offer for everybody who's on the call.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. I see, let me see.
I can't hear you, Morteza.
Frank, would you like to go ahead? Frank, if you're with us.
You hear me?
Yes, we hear you now.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I was not sure I was online. Thank you very much for this info session. It's very helpful, and thank you also for the witness in the previous cohort. I wanted to know if you can, Morteza, if you can share more statistics. Basically, how many applications do you have, or do you anticipate to have, and how many would you select? And also some statistics about just what are the proportion between finance and insurance, or the different subsection of the finance departments.
Yeah, sure. It all varies a little bit every year in terms of what's happening, and whether that's in person, virtual, macro environment, what's where people are. But we get a couple hundred applications, and we select 5% of them. So what happens is, as you apply, you start getting exposure to the financial services institutions who rank you, and then there are various like people who are looking at your application. So that in itself is like a good kind of pool. And then when you show up, a subset about like 20, 30 startups, sometimes 40, depending on interest, show up in the finalist week. And at that moment, it's consensus driven, right? So we need to be sure that about 4 to 6 people will be interested in you. Sometimes that is not the case. We do make offline connections, right? So if someone is one of the financial services institution is really interested in you, and you kind of didn't make the cutoff for the 6 or so that raised their hand and said, hey, I'd spent 12 weeks with you, then we're more than happy, if the ask is coming from the financial services institutions, and it has before, we're very happy to make that connection offline, and that happens quite often. And then in terms of the cohort, it's about 10 startups. 8 to 10 startups that show up, and that's generally 5% of the applicants. So it's pretty competitive, but a lot of people, we also use that list to kind of look at other needs in the firm at Accenture, other places, and we'll tab into it to reach out. So I'd highly encourage everybody to apply, and there's some things that you can't control. So
thank you for this. That leads to a follow-up, maybe in a brief description. We Optimalex, so we provide artificial intelligence-based predictive analytics for insurance claims department to assess and quantify the outcome of a claim. Okay, so we use both factual benchmark and their own data. And there is no really such an offer on the market, so we are basically a new technology on the green field. And my question was also to calibrate if you have, in your experience among the cohort of 10, you said, some of your startups doing pilots on a completely new field, so not something that they are replacing, or do you have experience pilots with some of your startups and your sponsors?
Yeah, so pilots usually are there is no guarantee that the startup is going to end up with a pilot, but in terms of historically, we have about 100 alumni and we have 340 pilots that they started, as they were wrapping up. And what we do in the program is really kind of ensure that you, if you take the opportunity, you're building the right set of relationships with the financial services institution. So as we start those introduction meetings and we orchestrate it and we are kind of the guardrails, but we also take a bit of a step back so you're able to build that relationship with them. So you have these, 4 to 6 very senior people in different organizations, and then they're also talking to each other. So some of the solutions might require some collaboration, especially it's not competitive. So it's also a good kind of have that. But they look at your tech stack, they look at the people. It's a very intimate kind of understanding of the startup, right? So it amplifies. It's the whole community kind of trying to understand what you're doing. So for you, especially if it's something unique and niche, it's a really good ground to kind of explore, have those discussions, see how it's resonating. And sometimes if you're building something like completely new, the pilots are easier than like having to replace something, right? Because then you have to build those pipelines. So it can work in your favor. Claims has been an important and hot topic. It has come up a lot. So I think you're doing something great. Everybody's on this call, like we have been kind of inviting the right set of people to join. So if you're on this call or you're invited, you're doing something that is relevant to our startup, to our financial services institution. So please apply.
Yeah,
Kenneth?
just add one thing in there. I think also like when you get your mentors, when you're in there, you're working with your mentors. It's also not like just a once and done sort of meeting where, all right, you do a little demo to maybe like 5 people from making a bank up, Goldman Sachs or anybody else. It ends up being a lot more your mentor really working with you about like, well, here's what our problems are. Here's why we picked you to be a mentor or to be our mentee. And then they really do go off and find the right people in the organization. In our case for software supply chain, it was from procurement, it was from security. So I think it's you're going to be doing many meetings, many Zooms. And some of it might just be it's they just don't know what the topic is that you're solving. So a lot of it might be you're sort of providing free advice and things, which I think be prepared to help educate folks is always a good example as well. But it's definitely not a once and done sort of thing. They're really we had a couple banks. We did probably upwards of a dozen different demo sessions and various things with them. So yeah, I would really, like I said, I would really highly apply. You'll have a great time, and you'll be like, this is a great example of it. I think it's a great thing that they've been doing at FinTech, especially with all the sponsorship they have from Accenture.
Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Kenneth, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Kemet, the CEO of BioKeeper Decentralized Privacy Utilities and First-Party Data Ownership Infrastructure. So my question was about, I was wondering whether you've had within the 5% that was selected founders that are running US companies but are working from home, like working outside the US. How is the journey like from there to the FIL? Do they get invited or do they have to figure it out on their own? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry I mispronounced your name, Kemet. Very nice to meet you. We do have international companies that apply. I think the idea is that if you're interested to work with financial services institutions that are headquartered in New York, that have a big presence here in New York, you're spending some time with them, and organically, like what ends up is that you have more presence in New York, and we work with the Partnership Fund for New York City, and their mission is to kind of grow the economy here and have more jobs here and have startups here. So if that organically becomes part of your journey, then that kind of makes sense. But the idea is that this is where your target customers are, then kind of you end up like having organic presence here, right? So this is a good vehicle to do something like that. We have startups that apply internationally, and they end up, having some presence in New York over time. The program does not provide, assistance in travel and commute and staying here. That's all on the startup. But if there is nothing counted against you if you are applying outside of the US. We have a lot of applicants. I mean, we live in a very global and connected world, and there are some areas like ESG that we are doing interesting things. We care about innovation, interesting things in Europe. The landscape has been just far more like niche there and developed and robust. So we open applications and welcome applications all across the globe, as long as you're meeting the criteria and are willing to be in New York for those 3 months.
Okay, thank you very much. We are a Delaware C Corp, and our primary market is the US, except that a key founder happens to be working from home outside the US.
That's okay. Yeah, so as long as they're willing to be in New York for the key meetings in those 12 weeks, and obviously also being in New York for February for the demo day, that should not be a problem.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Sorry, I think Frank, you still might have your hand up, but I don't know if you had a new question or if you're good. Any other questions that people have? Well, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to connect with you, John. Thank you so much, and thank you to JC for spending some time with us, especially on Veterans Day on a Friday as we are wrapping up the day. So we really appreciate it. Again, the key dates are going to be in your email. We will send you the application link, and then if you have any questions, we're just an email away. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.